This is Fans on the Run, a podcast made by, for, and about Beatles fans. And now, here's your host, Alexanian.
All right, hello. I think that was my world record for most hellos said in an intro. I don't have a rhythm anymore. I don't know how to host a show. This is Fans on the Run. There you go. You can tune off now. But no, we have a treat for you today. I am a sucker for Beatles memorabilia, especially Beatles memorabilia from the 60s. Why is that relevant, you may ask? Giving you time to respond, audience out there. And it's because we have a fantastic author with us today. He's the author of NEMS and the Business of Selling Beatles Merchandise in the U.S. 1964 through 1966. Terry Crain, welcome to Fans on the Run.
Ethan, I'm excited to be here, so...
don't get your hopes up yet.
It's okay, we'll be fine.
Yeah. Again, that's what they also said as the Titanic set sail.
Good point.
Yeah, this is probably fine. This is the unsinkable ship.
That's right.
Let's see how long we can go before hitting that iceberg.
Gotcha.
So, how are you doing today?
You know, I'm just doing really well today. It's a nice, not sunny day where I'm at, but that's okay. It turned a little cool, so it's a good day to be inside and talking to you.
It's not sunny here either.
It's an amazing coincidence.
Gotta love the East Coast. So, man, this virus.
It's affecting us down here, too.
Yeah. So I've been told. I'll probably edit that out. That was really clunky.
You do whatever you need to do. Whatever you need to do.
I'm going to jump right back to the beginning.
Okay.
When did you first discover the Beatles?
I believe it was probably when they hit Ed Sullivan. I was 8 years old, and I remember seeing that. And at 8, it had a nice effect on me, but it wasn't, earth-shattering or life-changing at that moment and all that. But I remember over the next year or so, I have an older sister, and she kept playing these Beatle records from her room. And I remember very distinctly, she had a George Remco doll. It's a doll made by the Remco company, and for the Beatles memorabilia people, they all know what the Remco dolls are. That was one of the main ones that everybody got. And she had George.
Now here's the hard question.
Okay.
Was it a hard or soft body?
Hers, I believe, was the soft body, I believe, and she still has it. She keeps it in a little dome all alone now, and I told her she can leave that to me whenever she decides to. But so every time I would go into her room to sneak in there to look at if she's got any records or anything I could play on my own record player, George was sitting there staring at me, and I can remember that to this day. And for some reason, that George doll has stuck with me, good or bad, over the years. So that's really my first remembrance of memorabilia. Now, music-wise, I can remember their songs and everything from back then, but I remember that she had the Rubber Soul album, and I can remember her album, the front, the back, the liner notes. I can remember the pictures on it, and I can remember to this day, I can play the whole album in my head back to back and even turn it over to play the second side. So somehow right in there around the Rubber Soul era is when it really started sinking in with me, and then from then on. So I'm a first gen person who was there when it started, and can say that I remember some of the early memorabilia back then when I was 8 and 9 years old, but the music, it still stuck in me from that point on.
Well, but that's how you know this is going to be a total nerd fest. When the host, the second question he asks is it a hard or soft body Remco doll?
There you go. And what's great is the person on the other end of the recorder here knew exactly what that question was and how to answer it at that point. And to this day, I'm still trying to find out why that company even made hard versus soft. And I've heard so many different answers to that I don't have the final answer yet of why they went and had two different types of body styles like that. But there you go. That's exactly the kind of thing that I'm looking for, is just an answer to a little simple question like that have always plagued Beetle fans.
Now, which came first, the hard or soft?
Well, that is another good question, because some of them say, they've got their collection of the hard and they've got their collection of the soft. Some of them say they did that because of they got by with cheaper materials. Some say that some guys just started changing the things they put in the machines at one of the production things, and it turned it in from the hard to the soft. But to this day, again, I can't get the exact question of why they had two different body styles that went out with those dolls.
Well, we'll get more to the esoteric realm of Beetle merchandise in a bit. So, apart from those records that you probably stole from your sister,
I did.
What was the first Beetle album that you remember, or Beetle album record, single, EP, I don't know, that you remember owning on your own?
Well, I bought the first one, 45, that I bought was Lady Madonna. I do remember that. I have that in my collection. I wrote all over the label, which was, when you look back on it, if you're a collector, they would shun on that. But my collection of
if
stuff
I saw
like
it
that,
in a record store, I probably would not buy it.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
What you're saying.
Exactly, because that they don't look for that. But when you're somebody like me who collects things not for the monetary value and not worried about how they're going to help take care of retirement and all that kind of stuff, I just collect it because I like it. So Lady Madonna was the first one, that the 45 that I bought, and along that same line, if I can answer in another way, I remember very distinctly listening to the song Revolution by the Beatles, and I remember very distinctly it was on. I was in the KXOK from the St. Louis area down in the States. Is what came in. It was what we got closest to us where I was at, and I can remember for weeks and weeks the song Revolution for the Beatles was out, and it was hot and all that, but I never heard the beginning of the song. I always got in on the middle of it or towards the end and like that. And it wasn't until a few weeks later, when the song was still going strong and all that, that I finally timed it just right, that I had the radio on, and here came those opening chords, that opening couple strings that John played and all that. Exactly. And I'm going, what in the world is this? And then it goes into the song, and I go, oh my God, that's how that song started? How cool is that? But it's just funny that I never knew that until almost weeks into listening to the song Revolution. And that took it even to a whole different level than what it was right then from before. So I can remember that, and I can remember Lady Madonna was my first 45, and I do remember actually the first album that I purchased myself was the Abbey Road album, and then I did what everybody else does. I went backwards from there, but that was the first one that I got my own money from earning my own dollar or something every now and then, and went down to the store. I probably bought it for about $4 or $5. That was the first Beatle record, the first Beatle album that I purchased on my own. And I still have that to this day. Pretty cool.
Since that was the first Beatle album, and you would have been, a youngin'.
Right.
Around that time. And there was this rumor going around that one of the Beatles was dead. Were you into this rumor?
I knew of the rumor, and I knew that I was probably about 12 or 13 at that time. And I do remember my sister getting some of those magazines that has Paul is dead on the cover, and they took you through all the clues and everything. And when you're 13 and 14 years old and you read all those clues, they all made perfect sense.
Yeah.
I mean, of course he was dead because we're talking about different things and all that kind of stuff. And
all those clues, like if you play Magical Mystery Tour Side 1 upside down and backwards, you will probably break your stylus.
Exactly. And when you read all that, and so I got out my later on I got my Abbey Road album cover, and of course everything on the album cover, the 28 if on the license plate and everything, it made perfect sense when I was reading this stuff, and I'm going, well, it's got to be true because these magazines are telling me it is.
That's my favorite bit of the whole thing, the 28 if.
Oh yeah,
because he would know
correct
that the math is wrong there.
Oh, well, that didn't matter.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter because really good people into those things can then tell you, yes, but that took into account that if he was conceived 9 months before, he would have been 29, and that's what, or 28, and that's what it was. So, I mean, it was great because for every thing you could put on one side of the legal pad that was a no, somebody would say, put something on the left side of the legal pad as a yes, and say, but here's how you explain that. So it was just interesting to read all that kind of stuff and how it went back and forth and back and forth.
My favorite bits are the ones where people try and find clues in like Revolver or Rubber Soul.
Yeah.
It's like, if you look at this, there's a car coming out of Paul's ear. But it's like, he wouldn't have been dead yet.
I know. But back then they were hinting. And here's how they hinted to you that this could be coming. And they would take it to a whole different level. So that was a fun little thing to go through, and it got you reading some more of the magazines, and it got you reading the more things about the band and all that kind of stuff.
It got you to go out to the record store to buy a new copy because someone ruined their copy of Sgt. Pepper by playing it backwards too many times.
You got it. And they all the insides and everything on it, everything, and they went through the magazine too many times, and one of your buddies borrowed it, never gave it back, so you had to go back and buy you a new one. And by that time there was even another new one out there on the newsstand. So it was just an interesting time to go through that and to see what was going on. And like I said, when you're 13 or 14, it all made perfect sense. So of course he's dead.
Of course he's dead. You heard it here first.
That's right.
So where were you when you had heard that the Beatles had broken up?
I was probably a freshman in high school, and it was one of those, you start hearing these things and you think, well, no, that can't be true. And then you hear something else and no, it can't be. So it took quite a while for it to really sink in with somebody like me that era or that genre or that specific moment in time could be gone. And then you go, well, they'll get back together. They'll do this or do that. Well, then you start hearing the different things about, well, now George has done this, and you've watched the concert for Bangladesh, and John's done this, and Paul's done this, and Ringo's done this. So even though they were apart, you could still keep in touch with them. You could still see what they were doing individually, and Apple was still putting out the 45s, and Apple was still putting out from different other performers, and the
because he had like
Badfinger
Finger and
exactly.
Mary Hopkin.
Exactly. So there was still an area you could still feel like you were engaged with them and see what was going on with them. And then, of course, like everybody, you still had this hope that someday they would do something and get back together. But it was just interesting to go through all of the different stages where they were going out on their own is what it was.
Hold on. I will be right back. I just have to... What were we talking about?
Well, we got Paul's now dead.
Okay.
Paul's
now dead.
And we got through the Beatles breaking up.
Okay, so Beatle breakup. So I want to ask, what do the Beatles mean to you?
I think it was just an exciting time. they brought something, I think, to me and to everybody that was a little bit different. And I realize people have said this before, but sometime you or your audience or whatever, watch the Ed Sullivan Show, the very first Ed Sullivan Show, and sit back with your popcorn and your drink and watch. Go rent it or something and watch it all the way through, from the opening credits until the end, and think about
the whole
the
thing.
Difference. No, yeah, watch the whole hour show.
Even
the first
with like
hour
the
show.
cast of Oliver.
Yep, all that. Watch all of that, and think about the difference between all the performers and the Beatles. If you watch very carefully the gymnastics and the plate spinner and the Oliver and the Tessie O'Shea singing Bill Come Home Bill Bailey and Frank Gorshin doing the impersonations and all that, watch carefully between what I would call old school, which is the kind of things that the what was going on in the Ed Sullivan Show, and then the Beatles coming on and performing, and then going back to the old school performers. It's what's interesting to me. It's almost like, and I know this is a weird analogy, but when you watch The Wizard of Oz, and when the house lands in the place and Dorothy opens the door and the black and white movie changes to color, and the rest of the movie's in color once Dorothy opens the door and now she's in Oz. Well, think about, it's almost like Ed Sullivan could be all in black and white, which it is, but the moment he says, ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles, it's almost like you could have color right then. And when they're done, it goes back into black and white. And then they come back on and it goes back into color. Because even if you watch it a couple times, watch it with the idea of what the difference is between them on that stage and the enthusiasm that they have and what they do to the audience and what they bring as entertainers versus everybody else on that show. And I think that's kind of just a small summary of the kind of power and everything that they had at that moment in time in 1964, which there was kind of a change of the guard and that kind of thing.
I like to think of that Ed Sullivan Show in the exact same way you described. It's basically that moment was where it was just a complete shakeup of the American, show business.
I agree. And if you watch it sometimes with that in mind, I think it becomes even that much more apparent that you're looking for, there's a line drawn right there of this, I don't want to say the old versus the new, but it is
the old versus the new.
It is. You could put that in there as an analogy of the old versus the new, and just the difference in them and the difference in the other performers going on that day and everything. It's just an interesting dynamic when you watch it that way. And I think that's just a small part of what they brought into the public and into many different things, whether it's the music or the memorabilia or any of that kind of stuff that they brought, that just gave everything a little shot of adrenaline to go forward from there.
Well, now that we're talking about what was it, February 9th, 1964, I want to ask you something. How fast was it, or how quick was... Oh, God, my words are jumbled. Okay. How long did it take after the Ed Sullivan Show for Beatles memorabilia to start making it in the U.S.?
There were a few things in the works a few weeks before. There was the sweatshirts, which you saw the kids were wearing when they got there. The sweatshirts were already a little bit in the works. Some of the memorabilia, like the Remco doll that we talked about and everything, right around that same time or even a few days before, they had signed the licensing agreement for that. But, and this is one thing that I really believe that mass marketing in the United States by marketing an entity started February 10th, the next morning, at Fifth Avenue in the offices of CELTAB, who did the U.S. merchandising stuff, because from the Beatles getting done on the night of February 9th until the next morning, you had all these business people from the East Coast, West Coast, and the central parts of the states. They all got ideas. We said, oh my God, these guys are hot. We don't know how long they're going to be hot. We're going to drive to New York today and see if we can find these management company and sign some contracts. So the very next day, on February 10th, that from that day over for the next few weeks, there was all kind of contracts signed for licensing for a game, for jewelry, for wigs, for all kinds of things. So that's when, if you talk about the music Big Bang hitting on February 9th at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern, when the Beatles went on, the mass merchandising in the United States literally, in my mind, started the next morning. Yeah, you had Elvis before, and you had Disney doing some stuff before, and you had some Marvel comics and the comic books and so like the Wizard of Oz back in the 30s. Yes, you had all that.
That cowboy stuff.
Yes. Yeah, you had Hopalong and Cassidy, all that kind of stuff. But you did not have as powerful as it was and as a defined entity as it was, that it started the moment that the Beatles came on, that Ed Sullivan. And I even say, today, whenever Disney comes out with a movie or something like that, as well as I, you cannot walk in Walmart and there's the official sweatshirt, there's the official tea bag. You go through McDonald's, there's the official Happy Meal of this, there's the official this of that. And I really believe that if you want to blame somebody for that, you can blame the Beatles on February 10th that morning and their management company and all the business people around the U.S. that had this idea that said, let's grab this while it's hot. Let's take care of it and let's get going. And they did. Within a month or two of the Ed Sullivan, you started having all kind of stuff getting cranked out. And over the summer and the fall, and especially that first Christmas for December of '64, you had some of the weirdest and wackiest and goofiest and coolest items ever hit the shelves of Woolworths and Ben Franklin and all that kind of stuff.
So I want to ask, how did the Beatles get so screwed over with the merchandising in the United States?
Right. And when
like how did CELTAB screw the pooch?
Well, that's a side story that everybody knows. Everybody knows when they start talking about Beatles memorabilia, they all say, well, the Beatles got screwed because when CELTAB, who was the Beatles management company, who sold the rights and got the licensing agreements and all that, but they were kind of their own little entity in itself. So they signed a deal with Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, and the Beatles, that said, we're going to keep 90% of the money and we're going to give you 10% of the money. Now, when you first hear that now, 50 years later and plus years later, I say we have the benefit of hindsight, because hindsight makes us all brilliant by giving us perfect 20/20 vision. Mm-hmm. So we're all experts now at this and say, well, they only got 10%. This company kept 90%. Well, they got screwed and they didn't make much money and all that. But what I give Brian in the 90/10 and all that, I give them guys a break. This had never happened like this in the U.S. or really anywhere. And just like I said,
it was uncharted territory.
It was uncharted territory. Mass merchandising was born February 10th in the U.S. There was no guidebook. There was no app to look at to see what's going on. There was no Excel spreadsheet. There was no Quicken files on your computer that you could go see what you got to do. So the idea is that these management company went to Brian and said, here's what we want to do. You don't have to do a thing. You're going to give us a couple of photographs. You're going to give us the Beatles name, and you don't have to do anything. You don't have to sit for pictures. You don't have to endorse anything. You don't have to do nothing. And we're going to hand you a check every month. And all of a sudden, Brian's going to go, this is the greatest gig in the world. I don't have to do anything. And they're going to hand me a check. Now, who knew at that time how much those checks were going to be?
Yeah.
And what finally happened. So, but I give the guy a break. No one had any idea in the world that this was going to happen.
To be fair, 10% of those sales is still probably a fuck ton of money.
It's a lot of money. Back then, it was a lot of money. Now, I will say that the first check they handed Brian Epstein was about $9,000. Okay. So Brian goes, whoa, this is pretty cool. We didn't do anything, and this guy's handing me a check for $9,000. Well, all of a sudden he does some quick math in his head and goes, well, wait a minute. That means if we get 9,000, you guys maybe are keeping 80 or 90,000 because of the way this agreement works. He goes, well, maybe this isn't the best agreement I ever did. So within 6 months of February of 1964, they renegotiated the contract, and it was more of a 50-50, 51-49 split. So he wised up really quick. And again, by that time, he had his own hindsight of how this was going to work and how this, But for about 6 months, you had the 90-10 split. But as I said before, that's when a lot of the stuff happened. That's when a lot of the things happen. Now, and I will also say that everybody says, oh, Brian must have been out of his mind only getting 10%. He must have just made that up or whatever. Well, it already shows in some agreements and all from England back in November of 63, and even a little bit before that, they were already doing the 90-10 split over in England. So this 90-10 number was not something somebody just made up on the spot when they were negotiating this. This was already been a standard business practice that they were already doing. So it was just, well, yeah, we'll just do the same thing for the US. But like we said, we're all a heck of a lot smarter now. Now that the basketball game's over, we know that we should have fouled that kid and not let him shoot the free throw that lost us the game, because we have really good insight and hindsight. But you know, that's why I said everybody's like a coach now. Everybody's so much smarter after the game's over, knowing what we should have done to win the game. But back then, hey, I give them a break. They did the best they could. Now everybody's smarter. Now the book has been written on what to do, and we'll just call Brian and them the help author of the book is what happened. So
how long did you say, or would you say, that the Beatles merchandise boom lasted?
Well, there was a couple waves here, and my passion is with the first wave, 1964 to 66. That's when there was about 150 licensed items out on the U.S. shelves. And I say licensed because that's how many went through CELTAB and the Beatles management company, and they said, yes, you can make this and use the Beatles name. Were there a couple of bootlegs out there? Of course. Of course. It's business. We understand how this works.
What are those cake toppers that are?
Well, you get that. You get some of the there's different styles of wigs. I mean, you could do a whole book on what would be called the fake items out there.
One of my favorite things is when I watched your presentation at the last Virtual Fest, the unofficial, or it was going to be official, but then it wasn't official, record player.
Exactly. Exactly. So you had some businesses that thought, well, we're going to get the license, so we'll go ahead and start making them. And then they didn't get the license. And then you had some businesses that said, you know what, these guys are just a fad. They're not going to last 4 or 5 months. And if we take the time to go get a license and do it officially and all that, it might take us, a month or 2 to get the license, and we're not going to get in on all the sales. So we're just going to roll the dice and make it unofficial and see if anybody catches us. So you had different schools of thoughts back in there, but so there was about 150 licensed items from 1964 to 66 that went on the shelves and everything, and that's my passion right in there. Now,
how did the first wave end?
I think there's a really interesting line drawn right around 66 and 67 to me, there's a line drawn when right around the Yellow Submarine, the Beatles stopped touring, let's say in 66, in late 66, and then 67 rolled along, and you had the Yellow Submarine items. So right in there, to me, that's where the line is, because so the stuff ended right around 66 when they stopped touring, and since there was no more tours and all that, the business people were a little worried about would they be such prominent in the U.S. and all that. So it kind of dried up. But then the Yellow Submarine items started. And the Yellow Submarine items, to me, was the second wave of stuff that came in starting in about 67. And that was a whole genre in itself of stuff that was around the movie and all that kind of stuff.
I see it as like the first wave of Yellow Submarine stuff was in the 60s. And the second wave started in the 90s and hasn't stopped.
Exactly. You know,
because you can get like the Yellow Submarine action figures, the Yellow Submarine Lego, the dolls, everything.
You're right. I have the Yellow Submarine Lego put together on one of my shelves here.
I'm looking at it too.
Yeah, what a cool item that is. So you are correct around that. The first wave of the perpetual Yellow Submarine stuff was probably about 67, 68, right in there. So that was a nice
perpetual yellow merchandising machine.
Exactly. So right in there was a defining line, and actually that's what made it. I don't want to say easier, but it when I'm doing my research and my book, stuff like that, and my passion is the first stuff. That's a very defining line for me. I don't go, even though I like all the Yellow Submarine items and have seen a lot of it, but for research purposes and all that, I stop right before that stuff hit, because that's kind of the end of the first wave, the first big push of the Beetle items right around that time.
So, how did you get started collecting and learning about the memorabilia?
Well, I always liked, I guess, the toy aspect of stuff. I mean, I still have my old 1960s G.I. Joe is still back in my closet, stuck in there, and the old comic books and the old magazines. That stuck with me over the years. So as I started
is one of those
thinking,
magazines Mad Magazine?
Well, of course,
okay.
Everybody had to have that.
Okay,
What
you and I
have
have that in common. I have my stash.
There you go. And so that has always stuck with me. And as I, as the years went on, I just thought it was more and more cool when you look back at those items and everything. And one thing about those items, I just say I'm a collector of information. And one of the things about those kind of items that you have to remember is the people that did those, which is 64, 65, 66, that's 50 plus years ago. There are many people who were there and was in that have passed away or don't remember what happened. And the filing system back then was a big black file cabinet behind your desk, and many of those files of Beetle things and Beetle stuff and how many sold and all that, a lot of those files are long gone. Mm-hmm. So it's stuff that I hate to see that kind of information be lost. So I'm trying to dig and talk to people and get as much as I can about that stuff before this kind of information is totally lost. And I think that's one thing about my passion about these kinds of items is I don't really, when somebody says, well, how much, this item's worth $125, and I'll go, well, no, I didn't know that, but that item was made on 44 Warren Road in Providence, New Jersey, in a warehouse that had 5 different offices in it, and one of them happened to be one that made Beetle items, and so my focus of a certain item is way different than a lot of people. If you look on in my books, and when I do that, there's not a mention in my book of a price mm-hmm. of how much an item costs. And I will tell people right up front, they'll go, oh, we needed a new price guide. And I said, well, that's great. Don't buy my book because I don't have any prices in mine. You know, I'm not the one you want to talk to. There are wonderful, wonderful price guides out there that will tell you about how much this is worth. You know, this Paul is worth this much money. And if he still has his guitar, it's worth this much money. And if he hasn't cut his hair on this doll, it's worth this much money. And that's a whole art in itself. But that's not my interest. My interest is, well, I like this Paul doll. What company made it? Who in the world thought about designing this? Maybe when did they get the license? Where was the company located? How was the era around that company, and different things about that kind of item? That's more of the passion for me than telling me the item is worth $125. That's an interesting part, but that's not the really cool stuff that I like. You know, I like the people. I like finding the people that worked at the factory. I like finding the people who went out and bought that doll for Christmas of December of '64 because of this, and the story that surrounds this, the stories that surround some of these items, and why people bought them back then and why people worked on them back then. Those stories are priceless. You know, that's the kind of thing I'm interested in.
I want to ask you about one specific item of memorabilia that has always fascinated me because it just confuses me. It's the Beat Time pinball machine. What could you tell me about that?
Well, and of all things, that was, quote, not a licensed item back then by any means.
That's what I was thinking, because it doesn't say, it's not called like the Beatles pinball, but on some of the backs of the pinball machines you can see the Beatles logo.
Well, if you look at it carefully, that pinball machine, like other items, especially items from 64 and 66, 65, they will allude to the Beatles, but you know, they never mention their name. That, you know, like you said, it was called Beat Time, and maybe there's only 3 of 4 silhouettes, or maybe there's 4 silhouettes, and maybe they're a little bit different than, but they're alluding to so they're skirting the line right
but with
there.
With the Beat Time one, it flat out says the Beatles.
That you mean on the back?
On the I don't know what it's called on the pinball machines, but you know, the bit that's not the actual machine.
I don't think on if you look at any of the flippers or any of the lights or any of the thing on the actual top and the front, I don't think you will see you'll see all kind of hints that it's the Beatles, but I really don't know. Now, what I have seen someone do, and I have seen people who've actually taken it and put the names all over it. Now, there is a later model, you know, that maybe by this time the Apple Core has now gone through and said it was okay. But the original one that came out, the Beat Time, had really no license with the with Apple or NIMS or anything like that, but it sure alluded to it. But I believe there is now one from Apple Core that they have actually said, okay, we'll let the Beatles and put the name on there. But I think the one you were talking about, the Beat Time one, was just a great one to remind you that this is what it could have been.
Okay, I stand corrected. I just Googled it, and the ones I was thinking about were modded ones.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I am crushed. I feel ashamed of my knowledge.
And I know I have heard of some pinball aficionados,
some pinball
as we will
wizards,
call them.
if you will.
Yes, some pinball wizards who have taken the Beat Time pinball machine and modified them so it's got Beatles all over it.
Yeah, it says the Boodles on the original.
Exactly. There you go. Yes. So, you know, they figured, okay, this is close enough that maybe we won't get sued. So let's roll the dice and see if it happens. And I will admit, since that wasn't a licensed item, I don't know if they ever got how far they might have been left alone in the licensing world. But I do know there were some that got sued. There was a doll in 1964. There was a doll from the Goldberg Company. They made their own Beatles doll. They didn't have the license.
Really?
Remco had the license, and Goldberg said, well, we're going to make one anyway. And Remco heard about this, and they started taking out ads in the trade magazines and all the publications, and they said, we are the licensed doll items. Don't anybody else make one, or we will take you to court. And Goldberg just said, well, let's roll the dice and see what happens. Well, Remco did sue them, and Goldberg lost, and Goldberg had to destroy all of their, quote, Beetle dolls and everything. But Goldberg did come back about a couple months later, and by golly, they came out with a Rolling Stone doll. So they knew a good thing when they saw it, but they just couldn't get the Beatles.
Yeah,
But they came back
enough.
with the Rolling Stones.
Close enough. Oh, that's beautiful.
I know, it's stuff like this, and that's why, and I keep researching. Somebody says, well, your book's done, and I said, yeah, but every day I look for stuff. Every day I look for new stuff, because you never know when you're going to find a story like that, or something that you didn't know, that you go, oh my gosh, this is classic. And that's what I mean about collecting information. I just keep finding stuff like that about that particular genre. And the one thing which you have probably found out when you interview all these people over the years about the Beatles and all this, is the Beatle genre itself. There are so many different specific factions out there, where someone is a expert at the 45 records, and somebody's an expert at the albums, and somebody's an expert at the 45 records that was printed at the Jacksonville, Florida plant from February 64 to October of 65.
You can address him by name, Bruce.
Well, yeah, but there are
Just
so many people out
show.
there that have their own specific faction that they love, and I think that's what's so great about it. The other day, I'm online going through some different videos, and I find where this group of Beetle lovers, their passion is Beetle guitar pedals and things, that like the wah wah and the fuzz box and the different things like that. What were the different pedals that they used during times? And they would have photographs from 64 and 65 and 66 of the Beatles in the recording studio, and they would have blown up.
I love those.
Like they would blow up there's John's foot by the Fuzztone 5500, and they will tell you everything about that Fuzztone and which one he used and where it was plugged into and to what different circuit it was plugged into. And I thought, oh my God. And I thought, oh wait, that's awesome. I mean, but I don't know of any other entity, that you can find so many diverse people and subject matters that people that surround the Beatles. It's great. It is literally great how people are experts at so many different things out there. And if you try to be an expert at all of them, there's no way. I mean, you lose it really quick trying to keep all that information in your head. But how cool is that there is so many different passions?
Don't even get me started on the Beatles musical equipment.
Well, yeah,
that is one of my favorite niches to go down.
Sure.
As a musician myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and did he use this Hofner guitar, or which Rickenbacker, or which Gretsch Country Gentleman, or which all this kind of stuff? You get lost
in which Vox solid state amp did he use on the recording of Dr. Robert? Was it the UL 730, or was it the Vox Conqueror?
Yeah. And isn't it interesting? I mean, the different subject matters, just when you think you've heard all 1,000 subject matters that people can talk about, somebody comes up, just like I'm old and I had never seen the subject matter of what pedal was used on what different thing, and here's the documentation, because here is the 72 pixel picture that we've blown up to 300 so we can digitally enhance of which one it is. I mean, that's awesome.
But again, that's the thing with the Beatles. As soon as you think you know everything, you know you don't.
Yeah, and you get, and I find really quick, you get in, I never, somebody will say, well, you're an expert on memory. I said, no. I'm just a collector of information. I just happen to collect a little bit more than somebody else. But because the moment, I think, well, the Remco dial, there's nothing left to find out. The next day I will run across something.
Yeah, next thing you can find some sort of prototype.
Exactly. And as well as I, with all the memorabilia and all that, I look every day out on the web and on everything I can find about things, and I'll be darned if there's not. Next week I'll run across some image of some prototype of some blank, and I'll just sit there and stare at it and go, what in the world is this? So I go really quickly out on these. And Facebook, people think of Facebook one way or the other, but I go out there all the time and go to these Beetle groups and go, hey, somebody tell me about this, because I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always somebody out there that knows something about
or at least someone
that.
who pretends they knows.
Exactly. But at least they've seen it before, or they go, oh, I think blah, 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 and all that kind of thing, which is just great.
Yeah.
Which is just great.
I want to ask you about your collection of Beetle memorabilia. Okay. What is your... It doesn't have to be the most valuable. What's your favorite thing Beetle-related you own?
Okay, and my collection is not very big. I'm very specific on that time frame and cool things like that.
It's heavily curated.
And I think the record player that you and I talked about once was pretty neat. I have a set of postcards which you heard me tell the story. Maybe I did tell the story on the night you were talking about when you heard me on the virtual fest. I have a set of postcards that I really like. There's a story behind them, and like I told you the story behind the record player that I have, and because I can look at these things now, and to me all of them have their own little story. Somebody will ask me, I was at a collector's house one day, and there was the Beetle record player, the real one, which only 5,000 were made, and sometimes that thing goes for $10,000 plus now. So I'm looking on the shelf, and this guy had this record player, and I'm sitting there staring at it, and right next to it was a Beatles handkerchief. And I go, oh man, you got the record player and you got the handkerchief. And the guy goes, yeah, but the handkerchief's just, it's not very important. It's the record player. I said, no, not to me. To me, they're their own little entity in itself. Now, yes, there's a price difference between the two, but there's a whole story behind the record player, and there's a whole story behind the handkerchief, and there's a whole story behind the flip your wig game, and there's a whole story behind the Beatles hairspray. All of them have their own little story that make them so interesting to me. But I think on my collection right now, my not licensed record player, and I think my postcards that I have from the Greg Thornton collection are pretty cool because of the story that I got told.
Do you have the licensed record player?
No, I doubt I ever will. I doubt I will ever part with a 4-figure and maybe by that time a 5-figure record player. So I'm glad to go visit it at other people's houses, and I'm glad to shoot photos of it and images of it. But I doubt I'll ever have that in my collection.
My hope is that I know the Beatles have some sort of licensing deal with Crosley, and I mean every audiophile listening is just shuddered at the mention of it. But I think they could probably do some cool reproduction record player and sell it as, pretend you're in 1964.
I agree.
I'd buy it.
That to me, if you because in the Crosley now a lot in Walmart or Barnes and Noble or something like that, yeah. I can see myself if you walk into Barnes and Noble and that Beatles record player now is sitting right there on the shelf. What an item that I think would go pretty good in that genre like that. I got one story about that kind of thing. They had the Ravel had the Beatles models back then,
the model
in
kits.
64. Yeah, where you could, and and when you're a kid like me in 64, you also put together the battleships and the tanks and all that kind of stuff. So I'm very aware of the Revell. Well, the molds where they made those original Beetle models, they had to have the molds to pour the stuff into it to make the models. Well, those actual molds are still around. They are locked up in the vault over in Germany at the Revell, their corporate headquarters now in Germany. So and I got it. I was talking to a guy who worked there. He said, well, down in the basement, down in the vault, on one of the shelves, there's the 4 molds of the original Beetle where they made the models from. And I asked him, I said, did they ever think about bringing those back? Bringing those back now in the 90s and way on. And they said, well, they think about that every now and then, but because of Apple and because of the licensing agreement, because things have changed so much over the years, that they doubt they will ever come back, because there might not be the market for them that they think they are. But isn't it cool? And that's the kind of information I like. Isn't it cool that the original molds where they used to pour the resin or whatever to make the models, the original molds are sitting on a shelf in a vault in the basement over in Germany.
Have you seen any of the new ones around that, like, people have taken those Revell figures and made, like, I saw a version of them, but it's like the rooftop concert.
Yes.
I just think that's just really cool.
Well, and think about this now. It's something that I was thinking about not too long ago with all these 3D printers now that are getting lower and lower in cost and all that. Think about what you can make yourself now. Mm-hmm. Think about when you can find the schematic diagram of the Remco doll or the Colgate bubble bath figure of Paul or Ringo or something like that.
Don't bring up those bubble figures.
Well, but think about how you could put that into the digital world now and press the button on the 3D printer just to see what comes out.
I'm still having nightmares from seeing those bubble figures.
They do have, the Ringo is kind of an odd face.
It's
I will
terrifying.
It is, because as we're talking, I turn around, I'm looking at him now, and you do have a point there.
Yeah.
I will admit that.
It's completely terrifying. I would not leave it in a room alone with children. But now I want to ask, even though we've kind of skirted around the monetary, what is the rarest item in your collection?
I believe in my collection is probably the record player that we talked about. The Lionel record player, the one that's not a licensed item. I've got the flip your wig game, and it's got everything in it, and I've got some of the other really cool stuff. But I do like the record player. Now, one I wish I had, I'll
you
turn
read
it
my
around
mind. You read my.
I'll answer it this way. The one I wish I had is probably it's a very simple thing. I want the grow hair on the Beatles piece of cardboard. Mm-hmm. To me, that's got to be the wackiest and coolest item.
Grow your hair on the.
Yep. Yeah, you sent in, I think it was $1 or $1.25, and you sent in this mail-in coupon. And what you got back in the mail was a flat envelope, and it was a piece of cardboard. It was about 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardboard. And when you got this out, you noticed that this sheet of cardboard had perforations that you actually tore off, and you got 4 pieces of cardboard. And each of these pieces of cardboard had like a little, it was like a little paddle, what it looked like, with either John's head or George, Ringo, or Paul. So you took this piece of cardboard, and when you took it off of the 8.5 by 11 sheet, it was probably only a couple inches wide, and it was, let's say, 8 inches long. Well, you took this paddle, this piece of cardboard, and you took a glass of water, and you set this piece of cardboard in this water. And within a week, the most amazing thing happened. The chia seeds that were implanted on the head of each of the 4 Beatles in water started growing.
No fucking
so
way.
You were growing hair on your own beetle, and so it's
hold on,
wonderful.
hold on.
Yes,
A motherfucking Beatles chia pet?
You got it.
Oh my
You
god.
got it. Grow hair by A&B Industries out of New York. And what I just love is not only is this item so cool, but back then when they wrote the ads around these things, I mean, you can't beat these ads. It says, your friends, watch them yell with delight and in awe as they come over and watch you cut your hair on your own beetle. I mean, it's just wonderful to read this stuff.
That's like a copywriting masterclass.
Oh, it is. So sometime look Google the grow your hair on the Beatles from A&B Industries. So after about a week and all, these chia seeds were going on, so you could have your friends over and they could watch you. You know, do I give Ringo this haircut and George this one, or what do I do? And that's one of the coolest. And I have seen it behind a glass case. I have never held the piece of cardboard in my hand, but to me, I mean, you know, it's probably not worth $40 now, as opposed to $10,000 for the record player. But to me, it is just as cool. the piece of cardboard where I could grow hair on my Beatles.
The advertising for the old Beatles merchandise is just absolutely beautiful. Like those Beatles blow-up dolls. I saw this commercial with this man who seems increasingly paranoid. Like it feels like someone's holding a gun to his head.
Yep. And that's one of the and with all the 150 items that we talked about from 64 to 66, there was only 2 of them that actually had television commercials made about them. That's one of them that you saw, the inflatable dolls. It's that 30-second commercial, and he's in the store showing the people about the different things. And the other one that had the commercial made, lucky you, was the bubble bath. Make sure you watch that someday. Yep.
There's a commercial for it?
Yep.
Oh no.
It's awesome. You'll have to go to YouTube and look for the Beatles bubble bath commercial thing. And that's a classic. Grandma drives by her young teenage granddaughter's house, and Grandma's got the Beetle bubble bath and turns her young granddaughter onto the bubble bath. It's great.
Oh, I am art.
Tell you and your listeners to go find those.
I'm gonna need to take some Xanax before I watch that.
It's pretty cool. So the 150 items, they only made 2 commercials, and that's the 2.
I mean, talk about, quality over quantity, I guess.
Oh yeah. Colgate Palmolive. I've even seen the I believe.
Please tell me the molds still exist for those.
You know what? Since Colgate, so there's 150 items in the U.S. that were made. Well, actually, there's probably only about 10 or 15 of those companies that are still around. And of course, one of them is Colgate. That's Colgate Palmolive, the one that's still around. That's who made so somewhere way down in their vaults, I bet those molds are still around, or they've got the diagrams. I've not been able to cut through yet onto that red tape and to find those, but I'm sure they're around.
Find the missing prototypes of John and George.
I've seen the prototypes before they were painted, and they actually had a prototype that they made before they made the actual one that was just a little bit different. But I'm sure down in the vault, just like we talked about the models, I'm sure down in the vault somewhere
Why are you making me think of some sort of like at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark?
There you go.
Sort of vault with like
that's exactly
all these Ringo dolls just staring into the void.
Exactly. And one of the things that I think is interesting about, quote, my line of passion now is I will talk to people about, let's say I give a presentation somewhere about the different items and all that. I will always have people come up afterwards and they'll go, you know what? they'll say, I lived through this. I was 17 when all this hit, or I was 14, and I bought everything I could get my hands on, and I had no idea of these other things that you talk about. I had no idea there were 150. I had about 30 items in my collection, and they'll go, I've never seen the rest of this stuff, or I didn't know they existed. And that was a part of my research in the book, which I think is kind of cool, because I wasn't going down that road. I didn't realize that so many people who lived through that time and collected and was the fans at that time, they only had certain things, so they didn't know maybe that there was a grow your hair on the Beetle, or they didn't know
probably for the best.
It may have been for the best, but how cool is that they can go, I had no idea that this existed or this existed. So it's that information dissemination that I can do that I think is really cool.
Now I want to hit you with some quick fire questions.
Okay.
What is your favorite Beatles song?
Again, and I know I can always say A Day in the Life, but then the moment She Loves You comes on the radio or comes out of the speakers, and you have the speakers turned up, and the opening chords of She Loves You, and when they start that, you can't help but get hooked into that. So that's one of my favorites.
As soon as you hear Ringo's floor tom go,
exactly. I mean, you can't not get sucked into that song the moment it comes over the speakers. So I think that ranks right up there. I think
it's the Beatles' most energetic record. Like,
you may have a point. Yeah,
rivals anything that the Dave Clark 5 ever put out.
Yeah, and Dave Clark 5 could add the sax in there.
Well, didn't the Dave Clark 5 have Remco dolls too?
Dave Clark 5 had Remco dolls too. They sure did.
Do you have those?
And I do not have those. I have seen images, and I know there are some collectors out there that have a whole Dave Clark 5 shelves, and along with the Monkeys shelves, although I don't know if Remco did the Monkeys dolls. I will admit at this moment, I don't know who did the Monkeys dolls.
Who cares?
Well, they do care to those collectors, because they put them right next to their Monkey Mobile, and they look really cool on their shelf.
On the flip side to that question, pun intended,
yes.
What is your least favorite Beatles song?
That's a tough question.
There's got to be an answer.
I could say, something like when you know my name goes all and on and on and on and on. Maybe that rivals up there with it. Some people will probably tell you Revolution Number 9, but and sure, it's long and it's 9 minutes or whatever it is, or even longer than that. But if you just sit and listen to it for a while, it's actually pretty weird and interesting around that time.
Yeah.
So I'll probably say something like you know my name. Look up the number off of the White Album, that kind of stuff.
Ooh, I actually kind of like it, although I do get kind of bored.
Well, and maybe that's really what I meant is I was thinking, well, this would be a great song if they had cut it off, if they had cut it down a minute and a half ago or something like that.
So, what is your favorite Beatles album?
I guess I could say the standard Sgt. Pepper, but I'll tell you what, when you put on Meet the Beatles or With the Beatles or wherever you're at that moment, that early rockin' stuff is just awesome. It just jumps out.
When it comes to that early rockin' stuff, you cannot go better than the Beatles' second album, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and it just blows up out of those albums. Just blow up out of there.
Yeah, like as soon as you put the record on your turntable, you are assaulted by your speakers.
Right, exactly. And there are very few songs that will do that kind of thing with you in music, and when you can find songs like that, you stick with them. And many of the Beatles songs are just that. way. The moment, just like Revolution that we talked about, the moment those opening two guitar strings start playing together, and John's playing those opening, you just stop and you're sucked into it.
And lastly, what would you like to plug?
Well, as an author, of course you plug your books. That's what we do. And I did the book. The first book was early in February of 19. It came out, first edition. And when I told you I keep researching every day, I do. So I kept finding things where I thought, oh man, I wish I could add that to the next book, or I could add that to the next edition. Oh, look at that photo, I can add that, or that new ad that I'd never seen. And in a little over the year, I'd collected enough stuff that I've come out with the second edition now. It's got it's got more images, it's got more pages, it's got some text and stuff in there that I've edited and cleaned up a little bit that I got to know. So, of course, I'm gonna plug the second edition of the book, and the first edition is still wonderful. It's still out there on the market. I still have some here. So if anybody needs one, it's out there in Amazon and all that, or it's out on the fabgear.company. Go to that website and you'll see both books out there.
Well, I, along with the rest of my listeners, need to go right now and pick up a copy. I feel like a bad host for admitting I don't own the book, but I do want the book.
Get the second edition. It's out there, and I'm very. There was a Andrew Croft, who is a Beetle collector and all that. Plus, he is he helped me design the book. He came and took an idea that I have about, I want to do a book with these kind of pictures and all that, and he took that book and took it to the 100th power of whatever I could think of. I mean, and him and I went back and forth, and it really, really came out well. I always wanted to do the book where the pictures are just amazing, where they pop off. And so, and the text is really important. It tells you about the Colgate Palmolive, and it tells you about the Beetle, the bubble bath, and all the details and all that. But then right there in front of you is whether you like it or not, there's Ringo and there's Paul right there smiling at you. And yes, it's got grow hair on your Beatles. It's got that, and it's got all these other wacky things that are out there. And I put them in something rather unique. I put them in alphabetical order. Which I know that sounds odd, but if you go to a lot of these other guides and all that, you first got to know, okay, is it a piece of jewelry? Is it a doll? And then you get what segment is it under? What category and all this? And I thought, you know what? I just want to go A through Z and find all these weird things,
it makes sense.
Through Z. Well, you would think that, but so that's how I did it. So it goes from apron to wig. I can't find anything with a Z right now, but I'm still looking.
You'll probably find something. And then I will buy the third edition.
There you go. Yeah. I'll wait a few years before I come out with the third. But yes, believe it or not, I already have some notes set back about what to put in the third edition in a couple of years when I go out, because it's just such a neat genre to keep researching and to finding out tidbits before this information starts going away for good.
It's one of my favorite rabbit holes to go down. And Terry, I'd like to thank you for coming down that rabbit hole with me today.
Ethan and I have had a wonderful time, and you are a wonderful host. You know your stuff, you know what to do, and you keep things rolling, and it's a wonder to be interviewed by you.
And to everyone else out there, if you've enjoyed this episode, if you're listening on YouTube, please hit that like button. Please subscribe if you haven't. Hit that bell notification so you get reminded when I upload my videos. If you're listening somewhere else, please give me a 5-star review, even if you didn't like it. It helps my ego. But yeah, Terry, thank you so much.
Ethan, thank you.
To everyone else out there, thank you. You can go home now.
Fans on the Run is produced by Ethan Alexanian. Additional voiceovers by Richard Phillip. This has been a Showtown production.